Now let's continue with this video series about ancient Greece having never existed. And you got to understand, when I say that the ancient Greeks or the ancient Greek civilization never existed, that automatically eliminates ancient Rome as well. I'm telling you, there was no ancient Greece, there was no ancient Rome. Okay, and a lot of people seem to get confused about what has happened or what we are talking about. People will hear that I bring up Anatoly Fomenko and immediately they trash Fomenko. They call him a lunatic, and they seem to think that Fomenko is the only historical figure who has questioned this new chronology that was introduced by Joseph Scaliger. So let's go over a few things here. First, let me read a little excerpt from this pretty good website. I will leave, I think it's a blog. I'll leave a link in the description box. It says, quote, "The chronology of the entire history of almost all the classical civilizations was developed by a man named Joseph Justus Scaliger. Scaliger lived around 1540 to 1609, was a French philologist and historian whose works on chronology were among the greatest contributions of Renaissance scholars. In his work, Scaliger investigated ancient systems of determining epochs, calendars." Let me stop here. Basically, this guy researched the calendars of other older civilizations, and he made changes when that calendar did not correspond with the Bible. It says, while scientists have proven, he says that it was Dionysius Petavius who calculated the Earth's age to be 6,000 years old. And Petavius was a student of Joseph Scaliger, right? And he removed the letter I from the dates, because during the Middle Ages, they added an extra 1,000 years to chronology when they introduced the BC AD dating system. Before the BC AD dating system, they would use the letter I or the letter J in front of the number. So, for example, you had, say, 1769. The real year was 769, but they will put an I or a J in front of it to indicate that this is the era of our Lord, right? J for Jesus, I was an abbreviation. It was the Greek word for Jesus, so on and so forth. It was not meant to be a number one. But when they changed the dating system, when they added BC AD, they changed the I or J into the number 1. And very few people picked up on it when they introduced the Gregorian calendar. Right? It says, while scientists have proven that our planet is much older than 6,000 years, perhaps billions of years old, the historical chronology of all classical civilizations, from ancient Egypt to the Ottoman Empire, is still being compressed into the falsified Earth's age time frame of 6,000 years. In other words, much of the history of the world as we know it today was formulated based on a falsified Scaligerrian biblical chronology. According to Fomenko and Nozovsky in their work, the book History, Fiction, or Science, the entire history of the Holy Roman Empire was backdated or shifted back by at least 1,050 years. And much of this history happened during the Middle Ages, not during the first century, as 12th century through the 12th century AD, as now implied. Other scholars like Walter Williams, you've heard me mention Walter Williams here, and Godfrey Higgins have made similar claims. Now, I want to make this as easy to understand as possible. That's why I made this timeline. Ancient Greece, or the ancient Greek Empire, from around 800 BCE to 146 BCE. And this is when the Greeks are said to have come out of the Dark Ages, 800 BCE. That's the era of Homer, right? Supposedly they were in the Dark Ages for about 300 years, and that the Mycenaeans existed before the Dark Ages. I went over that in a previous video. So the official ancient Greek timeline is from around 800 BCE. Okay. To 146 BCE. The ancient Roman Empire, around 753 BCE to 475 of the Common Era, right? The Roman Empire is said to have stretched a little longer. But I want you to focus on 325 in this little red box here. You see the name Eusebius. This guy gave Joseph Scaliger the framework, the blueprint to work with. Scaliger used much of Eusebius' writing to formulate our current chronology. And they claim that Eusebius lived in the year around the year 325 of the Common Era. And then you have the Dark Ages. And they come out of the Dark Ages around the time of Christopher Columbus, 1492. So they claim that Joseph Scaliger was inspired by the work of Eusebius, a guy who is said to have lived over 1,000 years before Joseph Scaliger. Right? And it was during Joseph Scaliger's time that the Gregorian calendar was introduced. This is a significant moment in our history because it is nonsense. I will come back to that. But let's stick with this falsified chronology for right now. So Scaliger is said to have picked up and expanded on the work of Eusebius. And keep in mind, Scaliger would not question the biblical chronology, right? That's what Eusebius laid down, a biblical chronology. Scaliger, he was a church man. He viewed it as heresy to question the biblical chronology. So right there, you're dealing with a distorted view of reality. A guy who is using the Bible as a history book. This planet is not 6,000 years old. Right? So you're messed up from jump. There's a serious problem now already with Joseph Scaliger trying to compress the history of humans into 6,000 years. So they introduced the Gregorian calendar around the 1583, around Joseph Scaliger's. Joseph Scaliger completed it. Right? So that's 1583. And then 1696, Jean Hardouin says, wait a minute, whoa, we have a problem here, right? He called nearly every ancient document a fake. Because you see, during Joseph Scaliger's time, his time and prior to his time, shortly prior to his time, you had a bunch of forgeries going on during the so-called Dark Ages with the Catholic, the clergy, these monks creating a bunch of fake documents, and they created them after the creation, shortly before, during, and after the creation of the printing press, right? So Jean Hardouin, after this calendar is made, and after Scaliger has made all these falsified documents, he says nearly every ancient document is a forgery. So it's not just Anatoly. Jean Hardouin kicked it off. He looked at the calendar, looked at the information, looked at the documents, said, hold on, there's a problem here. So after Jean Hardouin, here comes Isaac Newton, 1728. Right? And Isaac Newton says, whoa, something is wrong with our chronology. Right? Something's wrong with our time here. He said ancient kingdoms were pushed back. He said Egypt in particular was shifted back over 1,000 years. Do all of you people think this is a coincidence? You know, it's easy to just bash Anatoly Fomenko, but he is not the only scholar historically who has questioned our chronology. All right, so first you had Jean Hardouin, then here comes Isaac Newton, 30-some years later, saying the same thing. Something's wrong here. This ain't right. And then here comes Nikolai Morozov. Now, he studied astronomical records of lunar eclipses. So he is researching time in a different way, right? A different approach. Jean Hardouin was studying, researching manuscripts, supposed ancient manuscripts that were said to be ancient. He's saying, no, they were not ancient, that these were recent forgeries. So Morozov is taking a whole different approach. So it's not like Morozov was expanding on Jean Hardouin or Isaac Newton, right? So Morozov said, oh, wait a minute, there's a problem here, right? And then, right, that was 1894. So the calendar is made 1583, 1696, about 100 years later, Jean Hardouin is questioning this. It wasn't popular to question the chronology, the time around this time. It just was not a popular thing to do. And then, about 30 years after Jean Hardouin, here comes Isaac Newton saying, hold on, we got a problem here. And then here comes Nikolai Morozov. And around 1894 says, yeah, there's a problem here. And these are not the only people who question it. Here comes Robert Baldauf. He studied ancient manuscripts like Jean Hardouin. And he found conclusive parallels between many of the events of ancient times and more modern times. Right? And he came to the same conclusions as those before him. The chronology is wrong. Right? Now, I included J.J.N. McGurk. Listen, I didn't even want to continue. There are numerous other scholars and historians, right? Scientists, educated people who have questioned our current timeline, our chronology. So you cannot simply attack Anatoly Fomenko. Keep that in mind, all of you distractors. You're going to have to try to discredit all of the people who have questioned, educated people who've put forth information, done the research. You haven't. All you have is your opinion. You're going to have to debunk all of these people. And I don't see any of you being able to do it. You want to talk about us as if we are lunatics, even though we are simply expanding on the work of numerous highly educated scholars, educated historians, scientists, right? You're going to have to deal with a lot more than just Anatoly Fomenko. And again, I did not list all of the people here on this timeline who have questioned our chronology. I will include more in the description box. But what I want you to do before I leave, before I end this video here, you see that space in the middle that says Dark Ages? That era never existed. It never existed. The time between Eusebius and Joseph Scaliger, what I need you to do is to compress it so that they are closer together. So Eusebius is the year 475. They come out of the Dark Ages, not in the year 1492, but the year 492. And really, they are in the Dark Ages for the entire timeline because all of Europe was ridden with diseases the entire time, and they were illiterate. The majority of people in Europe did not become literate until around 1800, or which is really the year 800. And even before the Gregorian calendar, chronology was flawed, right? Even if we say it was the year 492, that is a flawed year. This planet has not been in existence for 492 years. You still have to understand you're dealing with the chronology of a brand new people, not an ancient people or an ancient civilization, people with ancient cultures. They were not saying it was no year 492 or no 475. So chronology has been manipulated more than once, right? So compress that. The reason Joseph Scaliger was so influenced by Eusebius is because Eusebius was very recent, right? He did not exist over 1,000 years prior to Joseph Scaliger. He expanded on the work from a church person who had recently, much more recently, lived, right? So I know this is a huge, huge twist in many people's mind. But for Europeans in general, their response to the fall of the Roman Empire concluded with Christopher Columbus, right? Around 475 is the fall of the Roman Empire. And then about 20 years later, here comes Christopher Columbus. Not 1,000 years later. That 1,000-year period that they say was the Dark Ages never existed. They created 1,000 years when they changed that letter I or letter J into the number 1. Yes, humans have been that duped. Because the thing is, people simply trust the educated class. They trust them so much that they don't pay close attention to them. So they slid that in there, using the letter J, the letter I. It looks like 14 whatever, 15 whatever, 16, 17 whatever. And then they change it to a number 1. And very few people are questioning it, right? And you have new generations being born. You know, they just snuck it in there on the population. It sounds crazy, but crazy is a good description of this world in general. Yes, we are much closer to what you think of as the ancient Roman Empire and the ancient Greek Empire. But understand, there was no ancient Greece ever. That is a completely mythological civilization. It was really essentially only the Roman Empire, and it did not exist the way you think. It was not no mighty empire with Alexander conquering the whole Mediterranean world, the whole known world or whatever. They did not have the resources to control a massive area like that. How could they possibly be in control and make that their empire? It was too many people, and it stretched across far too much land. That's why in India, the Indians don't have no record of no Alexander, because he never existed. I will include a video from a guy, I think he's Turkish, or he's from that area over there. He says he's been over there to those small ancient Greek cities. He said they were too small to support militaries the sizes of Alexander's. 70,000, 100,000, 120,000 men. He said there's no way that all of those men, a military of that size, could have been fed, provided with blacksmiths, provided with many things you need to provide a large military with in order for them to survive. Those could not have happened in those little tiny small Greek cities. So yes, we have been lied to, and there is a lot of lies to peel back, but eventually I believe we will get to the truth.